I think a lot of the inaction maybe comes from this, the way that the climate crisis has been presented to most people, which is, and how it was presented to me when I was a lot younger, was that the best that we could hope for is like a much worse version of this world continuing.
Yeah.
And all this world, or the best is that, you know, this world as it is now continues. And that doesn't seem very exciting for most people. Because I think most people are aware, especially people who have marginalised identities, are really aware that this world is really messed up. And I think that's why I didn't really understand a lot of the like excitement around what I saw as like kind of the mainstream like green movement, because I was like, no, there's so much we need to change about this world. It's not just like almost before, and I felt like we need to do that changing of that world before we sorted out the other stuff. And then it was actually coming across this like concept of, or this practice of climate justice, which shows us that the best that we can hope for is actually a completely transformed world, and it's very much within our reach, and that actually the best way that we can transform this world is by doing it through this like connecting it to climate and how everything's already connected to each other. And I think that being able to say to people, no, we can have a better world and there's something to fight for, not just to fight against, and that like we can have a world where everyone gets to live in dignity, like the very basic things that all of us I think want is everyone to be able to, you know, have a safe home and like have access to clean water and safe food, and not be afraid of like a violent policing system, or like all of these kind of things that should be very basic, and everyone has access to healthcare. Like these things are actually very possible, and that if we tackle the climate crisis with an awareness of like social injustice, then we not only stop this like big catastrophic thing that's happening to the world, we can also create something better.
Welcome back to Mixed Up. I'm Emma.
And I'm Nicole, and today we're interviewing Mikaela Loach, a climate justice activist, campaigner, and author. She was born in Jamaica and lives here in the UK.
She's the author of book It's Not That Radical, and soon to be opening the Awatu School of Organising.
And I think it's really connected to like heritage and belonging and all of these different things. I think as someone who my dad is white British, my mum is black Jamaican. I was born in Jamaica but raised in the UK. I like come from two cultures that have very different responsibility around the climate crisis as well, and experience the impacts very differently. So like in Jamaica where my grandma still lives, like she lives 10 minutes drive away from the coast, where one of my favourite beaches, Hausha Beach, has already been swallowed up by rising sea levels and hurricanes. And if a big hurricane comes, I kind of live in fear of when will she, oh gosh, it always gets me really upset, but yeah, will she always be safe like my whole life? I was recently at a climate justice camp in the Caribbean, and a lot of people there shared their real life impacts of losing their entire family homes, like losing family members to hurricanes, and it's really like real and present, and it's really scary in that way. But also on the like kind of British heritage side, there's a historic responsibility for causing this crisis through like literal colonialism, and then like through atmospheric colonialism, like this idea that or this reality that countries like the UK have produced so many more emissions, and so whilst they also colonise lands, they've colonised more space than they should have in the atmosphere, and in causing this climate crisis, and that there's like a historic responsibility to address that as well. And so I think it's also from these kind of dual identities of some of the most impacted people and some of the people who've caused the climate crisis as well, and recognising that I live in the global north now, so I have that responsibility. And that comes together, I think, to form the activism that I do. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I feel like I don't know if you answered a bit.
I feel like you answered my question, which was coming. Because I guess I'm really interested in, and I know I feel this myself, but I'm interested in that kind of motivation and that drive that comes from, you know, two sides of a coin almost, you know, being kind of born of a culture and a history that essentially represents the oppressor, and then also of the oppressed and people who are still very much now feeling that kind of
impact.
impact and that history in so many more ways than is ever really talked about, I think, especially not in schools. When I think about, you know, how we're taught about climate, how we're taught about, you know, I love seeing it when you're like, you've been going into primary schools, and I just love it so much, because I feel like you can feel the enthusiasm from the kids around this subject matter and around learning more. I've not done primary school, but I just last week did 12 to 14-year-olds, so yeah, so a little bit older. But I just feel like their want to know goes deeper than even, you know, the questioning that the adults that are actually essentially running our country are doing. And even those that kind of, I suppose to your point, do have an interest, but, you know, haven't found their way in a movement or in the action that they can take.
I think when I do stuff with schools, kids are so smart because they care so deeply, but they also recognise that lots of things in our world don't make any sense. And I think that's what I draw on that in the book a bit, about like the kind of wisdom of youth. I think often is like framed as naivety, but I actually think is this like more rationality of like, oh, this stuff doesn't make any sense. Like lots of things in this world don't make any sense at all. But this idea that like, oh, kids are just naive, they'll understand it when they get older. But understanding it is normally not actually fully understanding it, but just accepting it and saying, oh, this is how it has to be because I've been told that this is how it has to be. Oh, it has to be that, you know, we have loads of homes that are staying empty because they're people's second homes, and then we have loads of street homelessness. Like that's that, oh, it has to be that way. That's just how things are. Or like, oh, even the like really basic thing of that we are made to, as we get older, we're like made to believe that people are only deserving of food if they have money. Like it's such a small thing, but we're made to literally believe that, oh, if you don't have money, you don't deserve the food that's in the supermarket. The fact that the fact that we will have supermarkets that have food that rots while people are hungry in their homes. But we're told, oh, no, it does make sense. It's just like, we just need people to not be poor, and that's the issue. Not that like we've devalued people's lives to make them not. But kids will see that and be like, they'll be like, that makes no sense. Like that's so, like they'll just be like, that's so stupid. Because I remember one kid, I was talking to them, trying to explain like capitalism to like 8-year-olds, which was which is fun. We succeeded, But one of the points, they just put their hands up and they'd be like, but miss, why are they cutting down the like all these forests if they know it's harming the planet? And I'd be like, oh, it's to try and like make more money and like to, and they're like, that makes no sense. I was like, I know, it doesn't. And don't stop asking those whys, and don't stop challenging those things, and don't like accept it. And that's why I do a lot of work with schools, is because I really want to catch kids where they're at that like kind of 8 to 12 range, where I think that they are asking all these questions and they're saying that nothing makes sense, but I think it's almost like at the like 12 onwards, they start to accept that, oh no, this is just the way the world is, and maybe I should stop questioning. And I want to catch them and be like, no, don't stop. Like keep questioning, keep challenging these things.
I think that's the lens. That's why I appreciated your book so much, because I think especially for those of us that have been working in and around this space for such a long time, it's easy to get jaded, to become disillusioned, to feel a bit hopeless, to be honest. And I think I said this to you when I came to your book launch, because I was actually quite emotional, because I read your book and I felt like it kind of renewed me a little bit, and I felt like it did give us that window of that moment when you're younger and you feel like, well, it's all possible. Like we can change the system, we can do things differently. And when you sort of explained, you know, you talk about people being enslaved and how they had to kind of hold hope and hold space for the possibility of change, of a new future that wasn't what they were, that, you know, the trauma they were living through in that moment. And somehow the way that you expressed that and the lens you put on that made it so obvious that, of course, you know, if our ancestors can believe and can fight and can, you know, hold space for that possibility of change in the future, then we need to do the same. So yeah, I think it's a really powerful book. You know that I think this.
Anyway. No, but that meant I also remember you like us chatting about that at the book launch. That was a very emotional night. Generally, my grandma was there and she sang a song.
Shout out to grandma.
Yeah, shout out to my grandma. She gets shouted out all the time. Over and over. She loves it. Oh yeah. But no, she sang a song about Jamaica with me and my mum. It was really beautiful and lovely. It was like the first time she'd been in the UK in like 10 years, and so it was really special for her to be there. But I think that's something that I think about a lot. I write about it in the kind of there's an extra essay in the paperback, and it starts out with me talking about how I had a lot of like survivor's guilt when I was younger. I don't know if other people like can relate to that, but when I was, I think especially when I was like 12 to like 16, I had, or maybe it was 12 to 18, I had like a big thing where I'd just feel really, really guilty for the fact that my ancestors lived really much more difficult lives than I have. They didn't have the freedoms that I have now. And I felt like I had to work so hard to make up for that. Like, it was a bit of a weird thing actually, but I'd write down the like names of people who fought for our freedom on like a piece of paper and stick it in front of my desk, and like it was a weird like almost guilting myself into being like, if they had to fight so hard, like you have to make their fight worth it. And that kind of manifested in like me wanting to go to medical school and going to medical school and everything. That was what I thought was the best thing I could do to help. And then I think it's kind of morphed more into recognizing that change happens in lots of different ways. But I think that I've always felt very connected to those who came before us and that kind of ancestry. And I think I've also just spent a lot of time just like thinking about what would the psyche have been like for, I feel like it lives in our bodies in many ways, in our minds. Like I really do believe that my ancestors like are walking with me and they're there a lot. And yeah, I think often I'm like, if I felt like I wanted to give up, I'd be like, well, they didn't give up. Like they lived in circumstances that were way more difficult than the ones I'm in now. And even with like the climate crisis feels like this big like, you know, existential threat, and often it's framed as like the first one when it's not, because like my ancestors in Jamaica who were enslaved, like I can't even imagine how impossibly inescapable like those conditions would have felt. Like I can't, that's like a real existential threat to your life of like every single day. And they didn't, you know, just be like, okay, well, we give up. It was not just them, but like obviously so many people decided like every single day I'm going to hope for and believe in a world where we are free. And then when people were like liberated from slavery, it was like, I'm going to believe in a world where we have even more than that and we're freer. And I'm like, if they could keep doing that, then we must do that too. And I think often that like is held back in us by how we're taught history, or at least how I was taught history in like a very like white village. It was like but but it was very much like, oh, rights were fought and won in the past. We live in a golden age of freedom.
It's all done now. I'm so glad we're all past that now.
It was like, oh, nothing left to do.
Like, tick, we're done.
And I think I'd like sit in class and be like, this again, like being a kid, you'd be like, this doesn't make any sense. Like this is like, I don't think this is true. Like I can see there are so many issues. Like, but there is this almost like, oh, all these wonderful, exceptional heroes in the past saved everything for us, and we just need to chill now. But I think that deliberately is to like disempower people from realising that we can actually still change things, and the way in which people change things in the past is those same, like, it might look a bit different, but those same kind of practices we can learn from to change things now. Like if we're talking about like the like boycott movement and like divestment movement, like that happened around enslavement. Like people boycotted from sugar, and causing financial damage to the sugar industry was a big part of what led to the emancipation of people. It wasn't like, but then it's also often framed to us as, oh no, people decided that it was rubbish and sad, and like, oh, we don't want to do it anymore because it's bad.
But we can remember those things in our childhood, in our recent history. You know, I remember being in the supermarket with my mum and her saying we weren't buying certain things because of apartheid, you know. So these are things as well, I think we're also taught to forget when actually they're actually in our recent reference.
Yeah.
So what's been going on? Tell me.
Oh, not so much. I mean, you know a little bit about my dating woes. And I was seeing this guy for a bit, and yeah, it was really nice. We've been going on a few dates, but then for the last maybe a couple of months, and yeah, unfortunately, I got unceremoniously dumped recently, and she's back. She's back on the streets. That's my update.
Oh no.
Really. Yeah.
Not the unceremonious dumping.
It was very out of the blue, I can't lie. I was surprised. I felt a little bit blindsided, but you know, we move as usual. We can't let these things get us down. So
I'm stressed for you since we did our dating episode anyway.
I know. It's hard being a lover girl. I need people to feel sorry for me. No, it's good. It's like I'm seeing it as a net positive because it was fun while it lasted. It's summer now, and that means I get to spend more time with you and friends, and we can like go outside, do a little bit of people watching, have a little bev, and enjoy.
Yeah, I'm here for that. And I'm your wing woman. You know that. I'm ready to go. I will get those wing woman gladrags on. And I'm at your service.
That's what I need. I need my wing woman on side. I need that little confidence boost. I can't even lie because, yeah, I was like, sometimes the self-confidence takes a little hit. So yeah, it's good for us to get together and team up.
We do need to team up, given all the kind of under his eye, you know, blessed be the fruit nonsense that's been going on with the dating apps and all of that jazz. So
that's so true. They are definitely on their way out. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's got to be like an in real life outside affair, I think.
Absolutely. And I think anybody that knows us though and has listened to the podcast or anyone who follows us on social knows that we are outside. We love to share a little glass of wine together. People watch, just, enjoy living, laughing, loving.
Yeah, in fact, the first time we met, we actually shared a rosé. Do you remember?
I do. Yeah, it's so cute for us. That was our first date.
It was our little keep me, and now we're married.
Exactly. We are together forever. But yeah, I'm actually enjoying a little bit of a little rosé now. Which is divine. Yes.
Tell us what you're drinking.
I am drinking the Uncommon's Eleanor rosé, and it is delicious.
And this feels like a good time to let you know that we are really thrilled that today's episode is sponsored by The Uncommon. I'm particularly happy to partner with The Uncommon Wines, as you know how much I love a B Corp brand, and they happen to be the first ever B Corp winemaker in the UK, which means they consider the benefit of people and planet in everything they do. For example, to minimise impacts, their wines are all packaged in aluminium cans, which are endlessly recyclable and have a carbon footprint 86% lower than a traditional glass bottle.
Good for the planet and easy to pack for picnics and festivals now that summer is finally here. It's rosé season, and the Uncommon's Eleanor is a light and bright rosé overflowing with red summer fruits that's almost impossible to sip, so we recommend you savor. I don't know about you, but I'm picturing myself at a garden party or a little summer barbecue with a perfectly chilled rosé in hand. You can purchase the Uncommon wines at wearetheuncommon.co.uk and use our code MIXEDUP30, which gives you 30% off anything on the web shop. And another thing I really enjoyed about your book was, again, a reminder about people and obviously I'm just now learning about you and this new essay that you've published in the paperback version, again, about like ancestry and like thinking about these individual people who have like really contributed to our lives and where we are today. But even again, hearing stories about your grandma, hearing stories about your family, but also again, reminding us all about the interconnectedness we all have. It galvanized me, and it made me feel really hopeful, because I was just like, oh my gosh, that's the reminder. The reminder is like how much we forget that we're actually in it together and that we are meant to be together all the time. It was just something that made me feel like, again, because I kind of went into it being like, oh, I feel a little bit like overwhelmed. I was like, what can I do? what is the next step to take, and then feeling like one sole person in it. And so again, being able to zoom out made me feel a bit more like, oh, okay, actually this doesn't feel as stressful, or it doesn't feel as I don't feel lost in all of it.
I think there's there's also quite a deliberate individualization of everything, but obviously that came, and it's deliberately to disempower people. This kind of, this obsession with individualism, a lot of it started around Thatcher and
well, even now with the same Rishi Sunak the other day, he was talking about he's like, well, if you're too depressed to go to work, you're gonna have to just get over it, and talking about universal credit and stuff, and I was like, this is vile. I was like, what is going on? If we don't talk to each other, we're weaker as well. And if we don't feel like we have each other's back, we're also weaker. If in our workplace we're having, say that everyone in a workplace is having their paycheck squeeze, but no one's talking to each other about the fact that, oh, I can't actually buy as much food as I should be able to for my family, and oh, you're having the same situation. But we're made to feel instead that it's a personal failure, oh, you should be able to provide for your family, not that your boss is stealing from you. But it's this making it an individual issue, and even with the climate crisis as well, making it it's your fault as an individual, the way that you live your life, you as an individual, that's the problem, rather than there are really big systems at play that if we work collectively together, that we can have a big impact on changing, and moving away from this kind of guilt and shame too much, and instead towards what can we do together, and that collectivism I think is really, really important. But it's just, it was the individualism deliberately so that we don't unionize, so that we don't come together, so we don't join movements, so that we just stick I don't know, I talk about how I used to focus a lot on individual action, but I still felt really anxious and climate anxious. I'd be sat squeezing my oat pulp, making oat milk. I'd be like, this really can't be enough. This is really not. Yes, I don't think this matches up to the size of the problem.
It's overwhelming and hopeless, because as an individual, like you say, you can't make the difference that will move the dial. Right. I'm not saying that we shouldn't all be doing what we can, but you do have to zoom out and look at the systemic issues and how we can start to work together to make an impact there.
Yeah.
I think seeing us as each of us as part of a mycelium network rather than as an individual thing is so much better. I see it that my work nourishes other people, even if my work fails at times, obviously it all does. It nourishes other people's work, and I'm connected to other people, and I'm not working alone, and in the same way that how also a lot of the work of mycelium is underground and is invisible, and it but it's still important, because without that invisible underground work we wouldn't have this amazing mushroom that grows. And so I think just recognizing that we're also interconnected to each other, my life is connected to yours and is to yours, and the person, I was about to point at the person off the screen, but they don't exist. For podcasting purposes. But the person who I don't know, who drove the train today that I took, or the person who ran the barriers, or the person who made the clothes that I'm wearing here, or the person who owned them before I did. Our lives are connected to each other. The person who grew the food. I think just remembering that how many people are involved, even in each moment of our day, and how connected my life is to theirs and to theirs and to theirs, reminds all of us of the fact that we aren't individuals, and that there's actually an importance in, if we recognise the connections, that we can actually, the things that we do can change the lives of other people, and a lot of other people. And also if we do it with other people, imagine the amplification of that change and how much bigger it is. I think that it moves us from being lonely and disempowered, and to being very empowered, and to actually being able to really transform and change things.
I think that really nicely segues into, I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about, in the experience of your work, what intersectional environmentalism looks like, because I think that a lot of people still don't really understand that term, don't really understand what it means, and also what it looks like. And when I see you out doing your work, it feels obvious. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what it means to you, and how you could express it so people understand what it really means.
So the term itself as an intersectional environmentalism was coined by Leah Thomas, who wrote a book called The Intersectional Environmentalist. Always got to quote your sources. But Leah's brilliant, and Intersectional Environmentalist is also like a whole organisation. I was on like their kind of first board and when it started out in 2020 alongside a lot of different things. And it's basically just like a more inclusive version of environmentalism that recognises that environmentalism is connected to all other systems of oppression, and therefore we need a form of environmentalism that recognises all of those different interconnected forms of oppression that exist. I think I lean more into like climate justice, which I think is very similar. Maybe it's just a semantic thing in my head, but I just like, it's the thing that makes me be like, I love like intersectional environmentalism as well, but I just personally am like, I'm a climate justice girly. And I think climate justice, it's like this recognition that the climate crisis came from the same systems of oppression that cause people harm today in lots of different ways. Right. So the fact that we like have huge inequalities between people who are racialised as white, people who are racialised as black, is a product of colonialism, is a product of enslavement, is a product of the creation of race in order to divide peoples, to divide workers who would have had similar causes. So therefore it's also a product of capitalism, which has always been racial capitalism. And so capitalism, which causes people harm in different ways today, talking about people having their paychecks squeezed, etc., being like unable to live like freer lives because we have to use so much of our life in work and have our like pay stolen from us by bosses a lot of the time. But I think it's important to frame it that way, like people literally stealing from workers, like workers generating the ability for profit to be possible. That's stealing anyway. But basically the climate crisis also was produced by these same systems. So if we think about how the fossil fuel industry was able to kind of begin in the level it was, that was like the invasion of land through colonialism. So how Nigeria was, the first kind of oil was extracted in Nigeria, and how Shell began working there was through the colonial period when the British colonial project sold the entire country of Nigeria as if it is something that could just be like bought and sold to the then British company Shell, because their colonial fleets wanted to change their fuel from coal to crude oil, and so they needed to find like somewhere to get it from. And so whilst enslavement of people was abolished, people's lives are still being bought and sold, but in a different way, because the people in the Niger Delta today, the life expectancy is 5 years younger than the country as a whole. The life expectancy, I think, is 50, which is actually pretty wild, like if you think about that. And that's because of the health impacts of the people who have to experience there because of the extraction of oil and gas and the flaring and the, like, it's seen as sacrifice zones, and this creation of like sacrifice zones, areas where people's lives are being sacrificed, are almost exclusively in countries where the population are not racialised as white, they're racialised as black, they're racialised as like indigenous, like different indigenous cultures. And I think that cannot be, the fact that it's the majority of people who are being impacted by the fossil fuel industry, the majority of people who are being impacted by the climate crisis in a negative way are black and brown people, and the majority of people who are profiting from the climate crisis and the fossil fuel industry are majority people who are racialised as white. That can't be ignored as a dynamic. And so I think that recognising that, the same systems that caused people harm today also cause the climate crisis, and that therefore if we understand that, to tackle the climate crisis, we have to tackle these same like root systems. Right. For me, gives me some like level of like a huge amount of hope, because I'm like, oh, all these things that seem so big and that you kind of are told that are never really going to be addressed, or you're made out to believe like, oh, it's ridiculous, like no one's ever going to be able to like completely destroy whiteness as a system, or no one's ever going to be able to destroy capitalism completely. You're like, oh, actually, we have to, because if we don't, then we're going to possibly like end our world and humanity. And so I think that when we understand that there's an inherent connection through the creation, but also through like how people live in the world today, the fact that, you know, we might all be in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Whereas often people say that the climate crisis is all in it together. Well, actually, depending on existing social inequalities. Some people are in an unseaworthy raft, and some people are in like a giant like cruise ship.
I hate that expression. We're all in it together.
Yeah,
we are not.
No, we're not. No, like we are connected to each other in many ways. We might all be being impacted in this. Like, I think this same storm thing is, even if you think about like in the UK when there's a storm, people experience that very differently. So some people have houses that are really safe and protected. They have like double glazing and like, you know, safe doors. Some people are living on the streets and street homelessness, and so aren't able to be safe from that same storm. Some people are like unable to, or maybe their landlord refuses to replace their windows to be stronger, so they're more vulnerable. And even in that scenario of like a storm in the UK, you can see how existing social inequalities would impact how people's safety. And it's the same with the climate crisis. It's like, it's just a very, very big storm. And a lot of people are continuing to leave people outside, or force people to be outside. And we need to create a world in which everyone in that storm is safe, and everyone is housed. And there's not someone in like a massive mansion and someone on the street. Like everyone's good.
Speaking of Shell, I wanted to ask you about your time and your experience in taking the government to court over fossil fuels. Tell us all about it.
What drove you to do that? Do you remember the moment where you decided, right, this
I'm
is
doing this.
Right.
Get me down there.
It was a bit of a journey. So I was at medical school at the time, and I was like a student doctor, and campaigning a lot around oil and gas. I'd kind of gone on my transition from the more organising work that I wouldn't have seen it as organising, but it was, but like doing kind of mutual aid stuff in Calais, in like there's a big warehouse, and you just do like, you chop wood and fold clothes, and it just supports the displaced communities there. I would do that, and I cared a lot about migrant justice, and would be doing that stuff when I could, and then would be doing like awareness raising things through student things for many years, and making my oat milk.
Whisk.
Which already sounds like a very busy time for you.
and studying. And then I had this like big, I think like, oh my gosh, like everything is so big, I need to do something bigger about this, and joined Extinction Rebellion alongside loads of other people during that time, and started doing direct action organising. So we like occupied the roads outside of the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, which is now called, I don't even know, DESNES, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. They changed the names of these departments all the time so that people to fool you.
People don't know.
It's the same
That's really
thing.
sinister. That's so frightening.
Energy security is their like new way of trying to kind of wash these things. I don't even know, it's not even greenwashing at this point. It's like energy security washing, energy washing. Because it's not energy security. Really freaky. But they come up with different names all the time. And then basically we were like occupying the roads out there, and we were calling attention to the fact that there are these huge subsidies. So basically that the government gives in like literal public payments from money that could be being used for, you know, hospitals or schools. Instead, it's being paid to massive fossil fuel companies, which is ridiculous, because these companies like Shell already make billions. Like, it's actually obscene how much money they already make from off the backs of lots of people, and by sacrificing a lot of people in Nigeria and elsewhere. And we were very angry about it. So we did this occupation, and I think that felt like a last resort tactic, because I think direct action always is. Like, you try everything else. I tried all the lifestyle changes and all the, like, you know, awareness raising, and, you know, asking people nicely and signing petitions and all that stuff. And nothing was fundamentally changing. Like, UK government policy was still basically gave us a 50-50 chance of staying below the kind of climate thresholds to have a livable planet. And you wouldn't put your kid in a car that had a 50-50 chance of getting to its destination. So, like, why were we letting the government do that with our lives and our futures? And also, like, as someone who's racialized as black, like, putting myself in arrestable positions, like, I chained myself to the stage, and I was in like a police cordon for about 8 hours, and I only managed to not get arrested because it was a bit of a weird situation. It was like the middle of the night, and the officers were like, "Oh, you can just leave." So they were meant to arrest us, and then they were like, "You can just leave." And I was like,
Wow.
I was like, thank God, because I was having a panic attack and like not good because I was the names of all the black people in the UK that have been killed in police custody like were going through my head during that moment, and I was not adequately prepared, I think, mentally for that situation.
Do you think that you did you know I will probably get arrested, or did you?
Yeah, for sure. I was expecting
You were
it.
expecting it. So it wasn't like you weren't mentally prepared in the sense that you...
I wasn't, in the sense that before I went, I had this idea that if you are a medical professional, you can't get arrested. I had this, like, I don't know, I think it was just an assumption that I've made.
Yeah.
And I'd worked so hard to get into medical school, and I was like, I'm not going to compromise my medical career. Like but I was aware that by doing any sort of occupation, like you could just get like arrested. So I'll try and do, so because we were camping in the middle of the road. So, but I was very much with the headspace when I was going there that, oh, if they ask me to move, I'll move because I don't want to. But then, and I actually called the medical school before I went down, being like, hey, there's a possibility I might get arrested for protest stuff this week. I just wanted to let you know, like, is there any issues and things I should know about? And they were like, how's the people? I think it gave me some like confidence that when I was there, that I was like, if something does happen, it's going to be fine. But I still was like one of the only black people that was in this part of the occupation now. So I was like, I don't really want to put myself at more risk. And a lot of my like comrades were like, no, we want to make sure that you're like safe. And if you don't want to, that's fine. And then actually on that day, we did a reading of the IPCC report live. So this thing that it's like kind of almost like an art piece of like you read the entire report. Every person has like a shift almost. And behind us we had this massive banner. It was huge, and it had just all of the like references, also all the authors who like participated in the report and all the different references, and it was ginormous. So like just to show how much work goes into these reports, they're not just done willy-nilly, and the science is not to be contested. And I read the part about coral reefs, and I love coral reefs so much. Like, it's a big connection with me in Jamaica, and the loss of coral reefs in Jamaica is something that really like makes me deeply sad. Not just because also it's not just that they're beautiful and wonderful, it's also that they protect the land. And what I was reading was showing how at like 2 degrees we lose almost all of our coral reefs, and that means we lose those entire ecosystems. And it just really broke my heart, and I just couldn't stop crying. I was just like very like emotional, and in that moment I just felt like I don't know what I can do anymore. Like, and I was like, okay, well then, and then they needed someone to lock on because the police were trying to move our site, and I was like, I'll just do it then. I was like, I didn't like think I would, but I was like, I'll do it. Because I think that when people are doing it, feels like the only thing you can do at that point. You're like, I have to do this.
Literally feeling so stressed by it, just thinking about it. I totally...
And I think it was a bit of like, and then as soon as I locked on, I literally just like started like hysterically crying, and my comrades were like, are you okay? Like, because I think I wasn't mentally, but it was this moment of suddenly, I can't believe, I think I was like 21 at the time, 20. I was like, I can't believe that at like 2021, like I'm having to like chain my body to a stage right by Parliament because I feel like this is the only thing that I can do. Like, how have we got here? Like, how are we here? And obviously there've been a lot of people who've been doing like direct action work, especially Indigenous land defenders, who've been like chaining themselves to pipelines for decades and really putting themselves on the line. And there's many people who lose their lives doing climate justice work across the world and land defending work. But in that moment, I felt my heart really just felt so like broken for that. And then there was this level of fear of like, I can't believe I'm putting myself at like the mercy of the police. Like, I'm like chained here, like I'm stuck here. The police are not very friendly to black people generally. I was also aware that like because of different like class privileges and like light skin privilege, like, it's very possible that I won't experience the worst impacts. But still, it felt like this level of like fear. And then we were there for like chained there for like 8 hours, and then we made a decision at that point because the police had managed to clear the rest of our site that strategically it didn't make sense to stay there any longer, because basically you say you'll stay until they have to like cut you off, and so that's a tactic of like so it can stay for longer. But we decided collectively to unchain. 2 people decided to stay. This old man called John, he's in his like mid-60s or 70s actually. And when you're chained with someone for like 8 hours, you get to know them. Yeah. And he was because I didn't know him at all before then. He was really sweet, and he was doing this just because he didn't have grandchildren, but his friends did, and he felt like, you know, as like a older white dude, this is something that he could really do. And but then I think there's a moment also during that time where I was like, yeah, the fear of police really kind of hit me as well in that moment, and the police also gave me this like lecture on why they're not racist. I didn't even say anything, I was just sat there.
What?
And at one point one of the officers went,
"No way.
Do you think I'm racist?" And I was like, how what is going on? And I was like,
what is this?
And then he just gave this whole thing of like, oh, we're not racist, you give us bad name. Like, I was just like, I'm just sitting here, like, this is actually my nightmare. I was like, is this real? I was like,
I have goosebumps. That's so weird and creepy.
Like a nightmare within a nightmare. Within a meta nightmare. What is going on?
And because also then when we unlock, we don't have our phones on us, because obviously we don't want to have, if we get arrested, we don't want it to be that the cops get our phones and get everyone's info. So I was then the people who were meant to wait, it was actually ended up being quite bad, that people were meant to wait to make sure that everyone's okay, had been moved on. And thankfully I did, like, by the grace of God, found my tent and like fell asleep on top of my bag and woke up in the morning like, what has just happened?
Interrupting this broadcast to let you know that our book, The Half of It, is currently on pre-order, and we would love for you to get yourself a copy.
The book is about race, identity, and belonging through the lens of the mixed race experience, so you can head to the description box down below or to the show notes, click the link, and grab yourself a copy.
And now, back to the show.
Yeah, so through that became very passionate about fossil fuel subsidies, which is, I think, is a very like unsexy topic, but is very important because these subsidies are what is propping up the industry worldwide. And in a lot of places, the fossil fuel industry is actually not very. It's a bit of a weird paradox of where in some places it's not very profitable, and so they need these subsidies for it to exist. But then these companies are all still making big profits globally, so there's a lot to unpack.
Explain subsidies.
So a subsidy is basically, a government giving, in the very basic way, it's a government being like, oh, we want to normally to make this more like affordable for people. They'll be like, here's some money so that this can be cheaper for people. But the way it's being done here is that for the industry, so the industry have less costs. Oh, we'll give you some money so that you will have less costs, and it doesn't end up trickling down to the consumer.
Affordability is not being passed on to the
consumer. No, not at all. And it's instead what it did is it made the North Sea the most profitable place in the world to extract oil and gas, and so they're doing it because they wanted to have it. This is nothing where I think a lot of this doesn't make much sense, but this is a lot of it's to do with power, like especially the oil and gas industry worldwide, like the US wanting to maintain itself. As a global superpower is hugely tied to their fossil fuel industry. I think the fracking industry in the US hasn't turned a profit ever, or at least it hadn't until a couple of years ago. So, but they want to keep producing gas and oil there because, well, they do make profit from the oil, but it's a power thing of like, we can't concede to have to be buying gas from that's what they see it as. Is like, we don't want to do that, even though like oil and gas gets sold on the global market to the highest bidder. So it also doesn't mean, just because it's produced in the UK doesn't mean it's going to be used here. That's another thing that often is this energy security argument that gets pushed, that's like, oh, we need more oil and gas in the North Sea because it will give us more energy security against, Russia and whoever else. But the oil and gas is sold on the global market to the highest, but the prices are set on the global market, they're not set by the UK government. So just doesn't really add up. But so a lot of it's about power, and basically companies like Shell and BP hadn't had to pay any tax as well in the North Sea on multiple years, because there's this policy of maximising economic recovery, which basically says that companies operating in the North Sea legally have to maximise the economic recovery of oil and gas. So that means maximise the amount of oil and gas they produce economically, so to make it more efficient. What it ends up being is just extract as much oil and gas as possible out of the ground, and you legally have to do that. And to facilitate in that, they would give tax breaks, and there's loopholes, and now that's changed to the windfall tax, and there's more loopholes in that where there is a windfall tax, but if you open more new oil and gas in the North Sea, you don't have to pay the windfall tax. And so it's a lot of. I also would say it's really connected to the fact that the Conservative Party have taken so much money from the industry. They've taken over over £200,000 from companies that were connected to the oil and gas industry. So it's not insignificant. I think the influence and that lobbyists also have on government and to lead into these things. But all of that, I think, is important for us to care about, because when we care about an issue and we make it visible, it's more likely to be tackled. So people don't know that these subsidies exist. They don't know that these public payments are happening, they don't know these tax breaks are happening. Also, sorry, another thing on the subsidies definition is that the UK government decided to make up their own definition, so they weren't subsidies, which I thought was hilarious. So they were like, at first when we submit our case, they're like, these aren't subsidies, we define them as something completely different instead.
Wow.
Even though their definition is different to like the IMF, like the International Monetary Fund, like every other international institution, but they were like, no, we just don't think this is a subsidy, so it doesn't have to be. Which is a way that they get around a lot of this, is changing the language and making it all really confusing for people and making it seem boring, so when people tune out and they don't care about it. But before we did our case,
and for those that don't know, what was your case? What did you take the government to court
So
for?
the case was about this like maximising economic recovery policy, about these subsidies and about these tax breaks. It was basically saying that it was it's unlawful, it's irrational, and it's contradictory to agreements that the government's already signed. So around the climate crisis, so around the Paris Agreement, other things where they've said that they're going to tackle the climate crisis, it's unlawful, it's irrational for them to be promoting oil and gas production, which just makes the climate crisis worse and undermines the things that they've said they're going to do. And so we were challenging that policy in court. Before we went to court, the government actually denied they were giving these public payments, because they also can just lie. And they do. So they said, they're like, this isn't happening. Like, we're not doing that, and we're not giving these tax breaks. And then in court, they have to be like, oh no, sorry, because
Actually, when we said that,
what we really meant was...
and that's one function of legal cases, is to make information public and put it on public record, and especially kind of information that that can be denied elsewhere. When it's in a court of law, they have to actually address it, and they have to and they'll try and spin it in a different way. Instead, they were like, oh, we're really proud of this now, like it's really good, we love these companies, they're so great. And it was really hard to sit through that in court, of them boasting about these companies that I like have friends who've had family members who have been murdered because of these companies, like paramilitaries and other things like that. It was difficult to just be like, to see that defended, and also difficult to think about like how, something I thought about loads was like how lawyers work, and like the fact that the lawyers who were doing that would just work for a chamber, like they wouldn't necessarily be believing what they're saying, but it's part of their job, is they just have to. It was just, there's a lot of things that are going through my mind, but so in the sense that we managed to get it made public, and it becoming more of an issue that people are talking about.
Was that the main goal?
I mean, there's lots of different. I think legal cases, especially like climate litigation cases, have lots of different functions. It's not just to win in court. Like, that's one of the things that you want, obviously, to check, because that would mean changing the law. So we didn't actually win on all the grounds, and so the law wasn't changed because of that. But then it actually did end up getting changed another time. But they just make things windy and difficult. But
nothing is straightforward.
No. But one of them would be to win to change the law. And the other one would be to make information on public record, so that other people can use it, so then other campaigners and whoever else can use it. Another thing is to like build a strong movement around an issue. So a lot of people now are talking a lot more about fossil fuel subsidies than they were before. So that's another function. And the other function I've forgotten in this moment, but
that last one I think is so important, because I think, talking about our current government in the UK, everything is so opaque. Everything is so opaque. That's one thing that they're very good at. And so even just bringing things to light, I think, is just so important.
No, but it's also making it like a key issue. So it's not even just like making it visible, putting it on the agenda, so that it's something that is taken seriously and not just talked about, but it's like practically included. Maybe when people are voting, maybe when people who work within government are making new policy, they're like, actually, this is something that people are not in support of generally. These things do matter in that way. And so I think there are a lot of functions for legal cases. There's lots of limitations. Like, a lot of claimants feel quite disempowered by legal cases. Like, it's a big trend, I think, of it's difficult and it's long, and also
it's a massive undertaking.
It's also
time,
for
money.
Sure. But then it's also really out of your hands at the same time, because there's a lot of work that's required for it. But when it comes down to it on the day in court, like, we're not the ones fighting the case. Like, we had brilliant lawyers who were really, really, really wonderful from Lee Day, who are in a great like environmental law firm. But like, it felt really strange that whether the case won or lost, I think I felt this pressure on me around it. But then I was like, I'm not a lawyer, so like, there's only so much that
Where do you
we
think
could do.
that pressure came from? Do you think it's to do with the fact that you're very visible as a spokesperson, almost as a activist, and as somebody who is, I mean, all of those things?
Yeah, I think definitely that, because there were two other claimants. It wasn't just me. So it was Karen van Sweden and Jeremy was the other two other claimants, and they both didn't have like big platforms in the same way. And Jeremy was an ex oil and gas worker, and Karen's dad was an oil and gas worker in Scotland. And so both of them had a lot of like personal passion for being involved. But I think I was having to do a lot more of the like responding to how the case was perceived publicly. And so I think that part of it was that, like the fact that I knew that I'd have to like respond to people about that.
People also, would kind of call upon you.
But also at the same time, I think it also comes from, I have this big issue with like perfectionism generally in my life, and I put a lot of pressure on myself all the time.
I feel you.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely relatable, I think.
Yeah, and
of course.
Also that I think, and I'm sorry, actually part of it as well connected to the like connecting, being the platform and everything. But I felt like this case had given a lot of people hope, and this is a thing that I felt difficult back. When I was in court, I was sat next to someone who is like a long-time environmental lawyer, so I was kind of judging like from her body language, like, how's this going? And then part of the day I was like, it's not going well.
She's like, she's seen this before.
And at that point, I think I felt this like, I weirdly felt this responsibility that like we'd given the wider movement a lot of hope through this case, and that I was worried that we were going to be letting people down. And so I was already thinking like, how is the best way that we communicate this, showing that like this isn't a full loss, and that like winning isn't always linear. It's, you know,
I think that's such an
that's
important phrase.
So key,
It's such an important message.
But I think it needs to be understood so much, because I think that a lot of people, because they don't see enough change happening, they just are like, oh, well,
there's no point.
There's no point.
I don't think people even know what change looks like anymore. You don't know how to recognise it, how to chart it. And I think we're not used to things having to happen over a long period of time either. I think generally people are so now used to immediacy and that kind of immediate traction, or like a tangible change I can see, I can feel right now. And that's just not how things work in this space.
Yeah, and I think people are so used to the visual. I mean, like you were saying before about, you know, how essentially you would be the one who would be called upon, or, you know, people would come to you, I'm assuming, with questions. I can imagine your inbox is heaving. And that is really difficult to contend with, because it is this level of visibility and immediacy that people expect, especially from people with a platform, that makes you, again, feel like nothing's happening, or like there's not much more you can do or even give.
How do you balance? How do you balance that? How do you manage having to be so public whilst doing work that is both so personal and also so frankly triggering, I imagine, but also that comes with so much responsibility? And, you know, how do you balance that? Do you?
Who knows? I think it's, I just see it that I have a very like specific role, and I try and be very aware of like the role that I have, because sometimes I'll feel a bit insecure about that role, in the sense that I'm like, a lot of my like comrades are doing like amazing work, the people that I organise with are doing like really great like work that will never be seen, and I'm like, that feels so impactful and so important. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm just yapping a lot sometimes. No, I'm doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff as well, but sometimes I feel like I spent so much time like yapping away about this stuff or writing about it. And then I realised that is an important role, or I'm responding to people to more like public things. But that is also an important part, and that I think that it is really important to be. I see myself as kind of like a gateway for people who care about these issues, but maybe don't know what to do about it yet, or maybe they like care and have like an identity of like social justice in some way, but that identity hasn't like seeped into like a practice of that yet. And I want to try and be like, no, we don't have to just like wear our politics, or like, you know, we shouldn't just wear our politics. We shouldn't just have it as an identity. It shouldn't just be like a fun thing, extra quirky thing about us. It should be the practice that we do. Like the politics that we hold should compel us to organise and should compel us to do things about it and to transform the conditions that we all live in. And I want to try and convince people of that. And I think that it's just reminding myself that that is like, that's a specific role. I think also just seeing it as like work has really helped me, because for a long time I was like, oh, this isn't, especially when I was like working like when we were on placement on the wards during medical school. I mean, that's also work, we just weren't being paid.
There's a trend.
But I would see that as actually more as work, and then I'd be doing all this other stuff, and it was like the things I do for like fun or whatever, and that was draining because I wasn't putting any boundaries in it at all, because I was like, oh, this Instagram is just for my friends, and I was like, I have tens of thousands of friends. Like, no, you didn't. Like, that's how I saw it. Like, I was, oh my god, but no, which didn't make any sense. But more because I wasn't seeing it as work. I wasn't good at boundaries, so I would spend ages like giving advice to every person who sent me a message, because I felt like, oh, maybe that can like, maybe this is what will really like help that person join this group and like do this and that. But it meant that I like had no time for me at all, and I didn't like. And also this was during COVID, and like I was working on elderly wards, so like I didn't have any social life because I was too scared that I'd get COVID and bring it onto the wards, and you know, people would die. So I think I spent too much time online and thinking that this is how I could change things. And I think since then I've learned a lot about boundaries and having like really good in-person organising community. That's the space in which I'm happy to like give a lot of myself to. I'm happy to give a lot of advice. I'm part of like Queers for Palestine, and like there's a lot of like really young organisers in that space where they're very new to organising, and that's the space where I'm happy to be like, we're in person, we're actually in community. I'm happy to like share things and grow and whatever, but not so much like every single person that sends me a message anymore. Or every person that I bump into at an event. I think that there's like an importance for us to remember that we can't be in community with every single person, especially online, especially if you have a platform, but the community is actually really, it can be online, but it's not meant to be so big. And so like having, not curating, but like having a community that is the size of a community,
and
you
it's
can
not
actually
all
manage.
online.
There
needs to be
online.
moments when it's offline, or where we can like actually commune in person.
And I think that's what I think has really helped me a lot. And I know it's not accessible for everyone. Like I know that some people in-person stuff is really difficult, but I think that what's helped me stay more grounded is like going back to a lot of the organising work that I kind of started with more, and in person, and it being small, and it not being like, it won't ever really be seen on my social media.
The paperback version of your book is now out. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If there's one thing that you could, or not just one thing, but if there's something that you would want people to take from the book, what would that be?
I think a big thing would just to be excited about the world that we can get, and not just heartbroken and doomy about what could happen. We need to recognise that all of us are writing the story today, that the ending has not already been written. It's not, we don't have to accept the future that other people are saying that we'll have, but the only way that we not accept it is by active organising and by changing things ourselves. So this world where everyone gets to live in dignity, the world where all of us get to be safe, and that means every single person in the world, in the global majority, not just in the global north, that is possible, it is practical, it is real, it's within our reach, it's within our grasp, and we can achieve it. But we'll only get it if all of us recognise our role, all of us recognise that we're important, all of us recognise that there's something that we can do, and that the politics that we hold should compel us to act. And so I hope that whilst people are reading, they're imagining this like best future they can possibly imagine, that they anchor their soul in that place and believe in it so much that every action that they take moves them towards that, and that a big part of those actions are actually being active and organising, because that's the reason I wrote it. It's a book that's meant to be acted upon, not just a book that you read and think, I feel better now, and like I know more things. It's like, no, these things are meant to compel us into action. And I also hope that they feel less judged maybe by a lot of like climate discourse and feel included, and especially that folks who are racialised as black in particular feel seen and recognise that this movement is for us. And it's, we have the most to lose and the most to gain from how we tackle this crisis. So yeah, I hope that people feel motivated and inspired in a way that's active.
I think that's definitely one thing I can say about your book. I felt seen in a way that a book about climate justice, the climate in general, environmentalism has never made me feel seen. So I feel like you've achieved that, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to chat to us.
Thank you for writing it, and thanks for coming to join us.
No, thanks for having me.
As always, thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, as it really helps boost us in the charts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with a friend or loved one or enemy. We're not picky. And if you haven't already ordered a copy of The Half of It, please order one now. It is the best way to support us as podcasters and authors. We couldn't do it without you.